GLM 5.2 costs 5.7 times less on output tokens than Claude Opus 4.8. That's 4x40 versus $25 per $1 million tokens. Same task, way different bill, and the context window gap is just as big. Both models are live right now, and the pricing gap is real money at scale, so I'm running GLM 5.2 against Claude across 5 real tests. Multilingual, context, reasoning, pricing, and speed. All verified sources, no vendor spin. What I didn't expect. The cheaper model actually wins more tests than Claude does, but there's one dimension where Claude pulls ahead in a way that could completely change which one you pick. This comparison is for you if you're building something real with an LLM API and watching your costs, or if you're processing massive documents or running a multilingual product, because the wrong pick here could be 5x more expensive per run, and that adds up fast. Test 1 is multilingual and non-English performance, and this one can really hurt you if you get it wrong. You ship to users in Spanish or German, the model starts losing coherence, and suddenly you've got a support nightmare, because bad language coverage is a product failure. Full stop. What surprised me here is how thin the published data actually is. Claude's Opus 4.1 line shows near English performance across 10 plus languages, Spanish at 98.1% and Chinese at 97.1%. But GLM 5.2's model card only tags English and Chinese, so there are no multilingual benchmarks published at all, which is why you're seeing unverified on screen for both sides of GLM 5.2. Honestly, I expected GLM 5.2 to at least have Chinese benchmarks given it's a ZAI model, but there's nothing verified to score, so I can't call it fairly, and this one's a tie. Score sits at GLM 5.2, 0, Claude 0, 1 tied. Test 2 is context window and long document handling, and if you've ever tried to feed a full codebase or a 500-page legal doc into a model and watched it cut off halfway through, you know exactly how bad that feels. You lose context, the model starts making stuff up, and you end up chunking things manually, which takes forever. The numbers here are pretty clear. GLM 5.2 comes in at 1 million tokens of context. Claude Opus 4.8 is standard 200K, and that's a 5x gap right there on screen. GLM 5.2 also claims 128K max output tokens, though that's vendor stated, and one caveat. Claude Sonnet 4 has a 1M token beta, but for Opus 4.8, specifically, you're working with 200K. I was expecting Claude to be closer on this, but nope, it's a clear win for GLM 5.2. 5 times the context window is not a small gap, so that puts the score at GLM 5.21, Claude 0 with 1 tied, and if you're working with big documents, that difference is going to matter every single time. Test 3 is reasoning accuracy on complex tasks, and this is where it gets expensive when a model gets it wrong. You're running an agent loop, the model makes a bad inference, and now it's compounding errors across 10 steps before you catch it, because bad reasoning wastes tokens and time on every broken chain. I pulled 5 benchmarks from the same QBreed comparison so the test conditions are matched, and Claude Opus 4.8 wins all 5. Terminal Bench 85 versus 81, SWE Bench Pro Sci4 versus 62.1, GPQA Diamond 90.8 versus 89.5, AME 2026-94 versus 89.5, and the Intelligence Index 60 versus 51, and that last gap of 9 points is the one that really stands out to me. So Claude takes reasoning, and honestly the gaps are smaller than I expected on most benchmarks. SWE Bench is only 1.9 points apart, but Claude wins every single one, and that's the story. Score is now tied. GLM 5.2 1, Claude 1 tied, and Claude's edge on that intelligence index is real. Test 4 is API pricing and cost transparency, and this one hits you where it hurts if you get it wrong at scale. You build a product, it takes off, and suddenly your token bill is eating your margin, because a lot of people don't run the math until they're already in production, and by then, switching models is a real engineering lift. What I found here is a pretty wild gap. GLM 5.2 runs at $1.40 per million input tokens and $4.40 on output, while Claude Opus 4.8 is $5 input and $25 output. So on output, that's 5.7 times more expensive for Claude, meaning for a task that generates 1 million output tokens, you're paying $4.40 with GLM 5.2 and $25 with Claude, and that's the number on screen right now. I knew GLM 5.2 would be cheaper, but 5.7 times cheaper on output. That's bigger than I expected, and GLM 5.2 takes this one without any debate. Score moves to GLM 5.2, 2, Claude 1, 1 tied, and you can go even cheaper on OpenRouter at $0.95 input and $3 output if you want to push it further. Test 5 is latency and response speed, and slow latency in a user-facing product is brutal. You're building a chatbot or an agent, the model takes 3 seconds to respond. Users bounce, or you're in an agentic loop and every extra second of wait time multiplies across dozens of steps and blows out your total runtime. Okay, so here's the honest answer. I couldn't find production latency benchmarks for either model, and you're seeing unverified on both sides of the screen, which isn't me being lazy, because there's genuinely no public data for GLM 5.2 or Claude Opus 4.8 on this, and the only reference I found was Claude 3.5 Sonnet at around 4.6 Max's median, which isn't a fair comparison. I was expecting at least one vendor to have published something here, but neither has, so this is another tie, and I want to be straight with you guys about that. Final score, GLM 5.2, 2, Claude 1, 2 tied, and latency is a real unknown for both models right now, so you'd want to test it in your own setup before committing. Alright, so where does GLM 5.2 clearly win? 3 things. The context window at 1 million tokens versus Claude's 200K, so full codebases and massive documents in one prompt, pricing at 1.40 input and 4.40 output per million tokens, which is 3.6 to 5.7 times cheaper than Claude. And it's open weights, so you can self-host and control your costs completely. Now where does Claude clearly win? Also 3 things. Reasoning, where it beats GLM 5.2 on all 5 benchmarks with the biggest gap on the intelligence index, 60 versus 51. Multilingual with verified near English performance across 10 plus languages, while GLM 5.2 only publishes English and Chinese. And Claude's ecosystem of integrations and enterprise reliability is way more built out. Honestly, I went in thinking Claude would dominate, but GLM 5.2 wins 2 tests to Claude's 1, so here's the decision rule. Need top reasoning and broad language coverage for a global product? Go Claude. Need to process huge documents or run high-volume tasks without a massive bill? Go GLM 5.2 because $5 versus $1.40 on input is a gap that compounds fast.